Campany. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the APAD Talks. My name is Nicholas Fahey. I'm an APAD board member, and welcome to our education series. The APAD Talks bring together prominent curators, collectors, writers to discuss thought-provoking ideas, new trends, and unique processes involved in the medium of photography. APAD Talks start conversations that lead to understanding, inspiration, and action. And on behalf of the APAD membership, I'd like to introduce David Campany and have David is a curator at large at the International Center of Photography, and on the expansive work of William Klein, head of the major retrospective. William Klein, yes, photographs, films, and the show's opening in the summer of 2022. And yeah, so we're going to do, thanks for joining us today. Feel free to engage with our speaker by utilizing the chat box. We'll also do a Q&A at the end of the discussion. Welcome, David.
Great, thanks, Nicholas. Thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, if I've got a visual presentation, but if there are any comments or questions that you have, just put them in there. Where do you want them, in the chat or the Q&A, Nicholas?
Let's do the chat and then I'll put them all together.
Fine, you put them in there at any time, folks, and then we'll get to them towards the kind of last third of the time we have together. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. I'm in London, but as Nicholas said, I'm curator at large for the International Centre of Photography. I was based in New York, but now I'm based in London, and I did the shows that have just finished, and the Kline show will open on June 3rd, and that's what I really want to talk with you about. Can you see those visuals, everyone?
Not yet.
Oh, just a sec. Can you see them now?
Yes, perfectly.
Great. There you go. Well, red and black, they're probably Kline's favorite colors, and you see them a lot in his books and also in his exhibitions. Now, he's an interesting figure. I think there are some people that know Kline for his street photography and maybe his photography books. There are some people that might know him as a fashion photographer, particularly at Vogue magazine. There will be others that follow experimental film and documentary film that will know him as a filmmaker primarily. He's also a painter. He's also an abstract artist. There are lots of slightly separate audiences that Kline has sort of engaged with over the years, but this is really a chance, this exhibition at the International Centre of Photography, to bring all of those components together so you can really see a very complicated creative life. I think for a long time, particularly in the US, Kline was very difficult to categorize, particularly in the US. People like their photographers or their artists to kind of stay in their lanes and not do too many things. It kind of confuses people. I think there's more of an appetite now for understanding that a creative life can have a number of different parts to it, and those parts might not even add up or have anything like a kind of signature style. I think probably the only comparable figure I can think of who's really the same kind of vintage as William Klein, who was born in 1928, is Gordon Parks, who is probably better known, although he's died, he's probably better known now than he ever was in his lifetime, even though he was one of the most high-profile photographers at Life magazine, and he was a composer and a filmmaker and a painter. And so I always think of Gordon Parks and Kline in a kind of similar position anyway. Kline is still alive. He had his birthday a few days ago, and he lives in Paris, but he was born on the very edge of Harlem, just north of the park, Central Park. And he used to rattle around the Museum of Modern Art. This is before the Second World War, so in the 30s and early 40s. And I think, like a lot of Americans at that point, American artists, they were kind of looking to Europe, really kind of wanted to be there somehow. An older generation would have pitched up in Paris, let's say in the 20s, when you think of F. Scott Fitzgerald and a whole kind of American expat artistic community being in Paris in the 20s and the 30s. Well, Kline comes along after that. And there's a kind of aura around Europe. He didn't fight in the Second World War. He's a little too young for that, but he got to Germany by 1946 on a post-war sort of reconstruction mission, and then had a chance to go study and wanted to study art and went to Paris. I can't tell you the whole story because it's so complicated, and he's achieved so much. There's no continent he hasn't photographed or filmed on. There's no aspect of photography he's not really touched upon. It's pretty breathtaking. I guess if you know him at all, it would be for these kinds of images, just a little cluster I've put on the screen here. And since I can't do everything, I've made three different stories as ways of kind of opening up the question of who William Klein was and what he managed to achieve. So first of all, we'll go from figurative painting to abstract photography. So when he has all these kind of artistic fantasies about Europe, and he finally gets to Paris in 1948, having been in Germany for a couple of years, he wants to enroll in an art school, and there's a chance to study with Fernand Léger, the painter. And Kline arrives really as a figurative painter, but with a really strong kind of graphic sense immediately. There's a kind of flatness to his compositions, a kind of energy happening in sort of different parts of the frame. And he begins with figurative work. Look, there's one of Léger's from the kind of same period, so you can see why the two of them might have clicked. But Léger said something very interesting to Kline. He said, look, you've come here to Paris thinking it's the 20s and you're going to meet Picasso and everything's going to be marvelous, but things have changed with young William. And Léger said, look, think about maybe getting out of the galleries, maybe think about architecture or design or new media like photography or film. But at the same time, painting is moving towards abstraction, hard-edged abstraction, and then into abstract expressionism in the early 50s. And so first of all, Kline steps towards abstraction, away from the figurative and towards abstraction, but starts to think about architecture. So this is just a small painting, but it's a plan for a very, very large site-specific mural, you know, that might be painted on the walls of a building, not a kind of easel painting to be moved around. So he's thinking already about kind of mixing of media between painting and architecture. And he has a show in Milan, his very first show, and you can see there, look, there are small scale things, there's figurative paintings, abstract paintings. He's thinking about the spaces above the door, like you might find in, you know, Renaissance architectural buildings with these little kind of frescoes above the doorways. That's the invitation card for that very first show. And on the basis of that show, a modernist architect approaches young William Klein and says, can you adapt your abstract paintings to a room divider in a kind of modern apartment in Milan? And Kline says, yes. And this is why I've called the exhibition Yes, because whenever he could, Kline said yes. If an invitation or an offer or a challenge came along, he said, yeah, often bluffing, often he would say he could do things even if he'd never done them before in his life. So he said, yeah, I can make a room divider. So you can see that these are panels that are pivot and they kind of rotate. And top right there, you can see Kline's young wife, Jeanne Florent, who he met on his first day in Paris. And there are some other photographs of these panels where Kline is just trying to document them, but his wife, Jeanne, was spinning them. And in spinning them, it produced this kind of even more abstract blur, this kind of kinetic energy, in the long exposure. And Kline gets very excited about this, and it sends him into the darkroom to think about whether photography itself could be just a purely abstract medium. And he starts making things like this. It's a photogram, but it's not a photogram as you would normally understand it. Usually when people make a photogram, they have a piece of photographic paper and they put objects on it, like here's my wristwatch. You put that on the photographic paper, you project light downwards, and of course where the object is blocking the light, because the tones reverse, you get a light shape on a kind of dark looming background. Well, Kline wasn't doing it like that. He would have the photographic paper, but then he would have a sheet of card, opaque card, with shapes cut in it. Like here, there are these kind of hook shapes. And in the long exposure, under the enlarger, he would move these around. So you'd get dark marks on a light background. So they feel much airier than the kind of photograms we associate with Man Ray, for example. And Kline spent a year just in the darkroom, just endlessly experimenting with what you could do, just kind of pure light, pure tone. These are the kinds of inspirations. He knows the work of Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and Kepes, and he's very interested in that kind of Bauhaus spirit of experimentation with new media. He makes a book. It's really his first experiment in bookmaking. He would re-photograph his photograms so he could then enlarge them to whatever size he wanted. This is a unpublished spiral bound book, about 12 inches square, so like the size of an old-fashioned music LP. Amazing. This is his first attempt at a book, and you can see what kind of graphic energy he's got and sense of play there is, not just single images, but double spreads leaping across the gutter in the middle. I used to go and see William. I've known him for about 10 years, and I used to see this thing on the corner, in the corner of his apartment on the floor. And I think on my third visit, he let me pick it up and I saw what it was. Amazing work. I wish he'd published it back in 1952, but he didn't. So you can see how confident he is. This is just his first attempts at abstract photography. Has another show in Brussels. These kinds of designs start to appear on the cover of magazines, particularly Domus, which was a design and architecture magazine based in Milan. Cover there of an Italian publication and a French magazine on the right called Photomonde. Okay, so that's figurative painting to abstract photography. That might not be a story many of you know about Kline's work, but it's important. So if you bear in mind that kind of visual graphic flair, and also that interest in the page and what you can do on the photographic page, and also what you can do at the scale of an exhibition, bear those things in mind, because those principles run through everything that Kline does afterwards. Okay, story number 2, from the streets of Harlem to the streets of Algiers. Slightly different story. Kline had a show of his abstract painting and photography in Paris in 1954, which was seen by a guy called Alexander Lieberman, who was art director of Vogue, New York, US Vogue. Lieberman saw it and summoned Kline to his office and said to Kline, come back to New York. You've been away for 8 years, come back, work for me at Vogue. Kline says, I don't know anything about fashion. Lieberman says, well, you know, you've got a kind of visual sensibility. You can pick up the rest. And Kline says, yes, he's got no particular ambitions to be at Vogue. He knows what Vogue is. Everybody does. But he says yes. And when he gets to New York, he starts taking not pictures of models, it's kind of fashion, still life pictures, shoes, fabric, things like that. I'll show you some. But he also goes out onto the streets, takes pictures on the streets of New York, which has changed a lot. Post-war consumer boom, an awful lot of racial tensions on the streets of New York, a kind of manic energy. And Kline has got no kind of respect for the kind of established laws of documentary or fine art photography. He just wants to go out and make photographs, which eventually become a book with this fantastic title, Life is Good and Good for You in New York, Trance Witness Revels, which is a kind of alteration of like a newspaper headline, Chance Witness Reveals. Trance Witness Revels. And he makes photograph just as his kind of graphic abstract work is up there with the best abstract photography there's been. His street photography immediately is extraordinary. You know, in that first year or two on the streets of New York, 54, 55, he made some of the best known street photographs ever, anywhere in the world. And this is straight out of the gate. This is the first time he's been out into the world with his camera. So I'll just show you some of these. And I guess if you know Kline's work, you'll know some of the New York pictures from 54, 55. That book that I showed you, just showed you the cover there, is now regarded as one of the most important photographic books. It's published before Robert Frank's The Americans. It doesn't have any of the kind of melancholy of The Americans. It's similarly interested in America's racial tensions, but Kline is often kind of ebullient about it. He's not photographing alienated people on the streets. He's from a distance, he's going up to them, he's engaging with them. There's a kind of mini theater, spontaneous little exchange that happens between him and his subjects. A great sense of fun. People are encouraged to be themselves, to perform. I mean, and he's moving between these kinds of pictures, almost abstract shots, black life, white life, working class life, middle class life, upper class life. It's all in this book. He couldn't get it published anywhere in America, partly because of its design. All of these kind of hectic spreads, no two spreads are the same. But also, I think this is mid-50s America. He's got black people and white people in the same book. And if you look at books from the 50s, you hardly ever see that. But the book was published in France, in Paris, in Milan, in Italy, and in London. 3 different editions. And those books traveled all over the world, and they changed photography all over the world. No continent was unaffected really by, or street photography was unaffected by that work. Amazing double spread there. Full bleed, so none of the kind of pure kind of fine art white borders around the pictures, making it like a kind of precious album. It's almost kind of, it's very elegant, but it's almost kind of comic book at moments, trying all kinds of different things and kind of use of white space like this. And I think he gets better and better. He then makes a book of photographs of Rome, then Moscow, then Tokyo. And those 4 books together are unparalleled. I don't think anybody's come even close. Kline is not just the photographer, He's his own editor, his own designer. He writes amazing captions, which are kind of witty and funny and acerbic and insightful and endearing and affectionate. He does the covers. So these books are total works. Everything is by Kline. So that's Kline, the writer, the photographer, the designer, the whole thing. That's one of my favorite pictures from the Tokyo book, where he stumbles into a hairdressing school in Tokyo. Now, I mentioned this interest in Black life that's there in the New York book. He's in Dakar, Senegal. This is picture is taken on Independence Day celebrations, 1963. It was eventually published in the Weekend Telegraph magazine in the UK. Probably not a picture even, you know, deep Kline fans will know about, but he's there. He's there and he's interested in what's going on in African independence. Back in New York, he sees the rise of Cassius Clay, who later changes his name to Muhammad Ali. Cassius Clay won the Olympic gold for boxing for the USA. And he was very outspoken. He was super smart. He was clownish. A lot of the boxing fraternity didn't really take him seriously. He was politically outspoken even when he was very young. Anyway, Kline decides, he's made a few films by this point, and he decides he wants to make a documentary about the young Cassius Clay, who's going to have a fight in Miami. He's going to fight Sonny Liston. So Kline gets on a plane in New York, and who does he find himself sitting next to? Malcolm X. And they strike up a conversation, and over the 3-hour flight, they become great friends. And Malcolm X was the kind of unofficial mentor of the young Cassius Clay. And Malcolm gets Kline straight into the heart of the camp, the training camp, the entourage. He doesn't have the rights to shoot the actual boxing match, but he's not interested in that. He's interested in Cassius Clay. Now, whenever you see footage of the young Clay in black and white, it's usually from Kline's film. He makes an extraordinarily energetic film. They're perfect partners in a way, Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, and Kline. You know, they're both just so alive, so interested in the world. They want to remake it somehow. They have all of this energy, and things just spark between them. It's an amazing film if you ever get a chance to see it. That film, Cassius the Great, plays all over the world, and it plays all over Africa. Pretty much anywhere that will project a movie image plays it, and it plays for years and years. And that's how Cassius Clay becomes the worldwide superstar and the embodiment of a certain kind of Black vitality, independence of spirit, something kind of irrepressible. Kline's film is the thing that really energizes this and puts Clay's presence all over the world, but particularly in Africa. And then a few years later, Kline is invited by Algeria, the state of Algeria, to be the kind of presiding filmmaker to document the Pan-African Festival of Algiers in 1969. So this is an enormous gathering of politicians, musicians, poets, activists, performers of one kind or another, dance troupes, and events are going to be taking place all over the city of Algiers in the space of 24 hours. And Kline can't be everywhere, so he coordinates 7 camera crews, gives them instructions of what to film and how to film it, and then makes really one of the defining films of kind of Black independence of the late 60s. There's no narration. It's almost like a collage film. He just throws you into one situation, then another, and you'll see political slogans on the screen, and you'll hear politicians speaking, and then musicians. Incredible film. while he's in Algiers, he meets Eldridge Cleaver. And Cleaver is there. He's actually on the run from the FBI. He was the quote unquote Minister of Information for the Black Panthers. And they want to meet. And they get on super well. And Kline on the spot decides he's going to make a kind of film portrait, documentary portrait of Cleaver. And they spend 3 days together, and Cleaver unfolds his philosophy and his attitudes around Black independence and Black experience in America, and how it might connect with what's going on in different countries. It's an incredible film portrait. Kline cuts the movie and gets it distributed in the US. The seats are at revolutionary prices. That was how it was sold. Cheaper ticket prices so that people could go see it. And also Kline insisted that half the profits would go to the Panthers. And this absolutely scandalized the film industry and film distribution in the US. The idea that the Black Panthers would profit somehow from this movie. It even made the whole story even made the cover of Variety magazine, the kind of the film industry kind of standard newspaper. And then years later, about a decade later, Kline makes a film about Little Richard, you know, the pioneer of rock and roll, really the inventor of rock and roll, who's had this meteoric rise in the 50s, completely transformed everything. Little Richard played all over the world, but especially in Hamburg, where he met and became friends with the Beatles. And so that passage of a certain kind of rock and roll through the Beatles and into pop, all of that comes from Little Richard. But by the late 70s, 80s, he's on hard times. He made some records in the early 70s. He's actually selling Bibles at this point. And Kline wants to make a film and to tell the Little Richard story, which he felt was the kind of defining story of America in many ways. Maybe not the story that America really wanted to hear. Mainstream middle America wanted to hear. Nonetheless, that's how Kline thought of it. And then halfway through the making of the film, Little Richard disappeared. He had various problems with royalties for his records, and he was always getting ripped off. And he kind of disappeared to kind of track down some people that were ripping him off. And Kline was stuck. What was he going to do? He's got half a movie. He goes to Hollywood and he arranges casting auditions. 400 people auditioned to play Little Richard. And you see this in the film. There's even a young white woman in her 20s. And Kline says, "What are you doing? We're trying to cast Little Richard." And she says, "Well, you know, it's Hollywood, you never know." But Kline is very interested in these three young guys who've got their Little Richard performances just down pat. They're amazing at it. And Kline finishes the film with them, not with Little Richard, with these young lookalikes. And this is miles ahead of, you know, tribute culture and tribute bands and all of that kind of thing. Really an amazing film. It's not that well distributed, so it's quite hard to get a look at, but we'll be arranging some screenings in conjunction with the exhibition in cinema in the Lower East Side. Okay, that's two stories. Now I'll give you a third one. We'll go back to the abstract photography, and we'll take the abstract photography in a different direction, which is towards the pages of Vogue. So bear with me as we go on to the third story. Kline gets introduced to the pages of Vogue really as an interesting photographic artist here. So someone who's interesting for his visual sensibility, not necessarily as a fashion photographer. In fact, Kline's only just arrived back in New York at this point, 8 years in Europe, 6 of those in Paris. Vogue was a very interesting magazine. for a long, long time. Well, maybe it's still interesting now, but what was interesting about it then is that it wasn't just a fashion magazine, it was a kind of culture magazine. So they would cover the arts and literature and cinema, architecture sometimes. So there was a place for spreads like this in Vogue of that time. Kline didn't get to shoot the models for a while, so he would make these kind of fashion still life, so like this season's colors, for example, and he'd have to find ways to make them interesting on the page. So there you get the color swatches of fabric, and they're overlaid with this kind of plastic sheeting, just to give it a kind of visual texture. So Kline earns himself a reputation as a very interesting problem solver, a visual problem solver. Give him something dull and he'll be able to make something really interesting out of it. Some shoes here, you can probably see a little bit of the influence of Irving Penn. At the time, Irving Penn and Richard Avedon were the kind of reigning figures in American fashion photography, although there were lots of other innovative people around too. And then he starts to work with models. He's still playing with what you can do kind of plastically with the image. He's shooting in different parts of the world. Here's a piece from Greece. Here's an interesting one. This is 1959. This is actually on the roof of Richard Avedon's studio. Something's just appeared on my screen there. What's that? Just a sec. It's my software protection. Okay. Oh, yeah, that's better. Great. So this is actually on the roof of Richard Avedon's studio. Kline was shooting with models in the studio and was just getting bored. It was all a bit dull and a bit airless, and said, let's go up onto the roof, bring those dressing mirrors. So he starts improvising with the models. He's not really got an idea of what he's going to do. He's just trying to make it interesting. So you've got a kind of New York skyline in the background. In fact, the model on the right, the far right there, is the actress Uma Thurman's mother. Once you know that, you can see the similarity. And in fact, you can see her reflection on the very, very far left too. Vogue actually cropped the picture. That's the full frame that Kline shot. So subsequently, when Kline started to publish his work and exhibit it, he returned to the negatives and would often revert to the framing that he'd set when he took the pictures. Another spread here. This is an interesting one, taken in the Lower East Side. He would have shop fronts painted just to kind of contrast with the fabrics that he had to be photographing. The guy on the right there was actually working in the shop next door, and Kline invited him to be in the picture. When the photograph is published in Vogue, he actually gets cropped out. But later on, when Kline sort of exhibits the picture and publishes it, he kind of reinstates the full frame. Paris hats in America. You can see the woman smoking, or several of them smoking, but the one top middle became a very well-known, almost iconic fashion image from Kline. These are shot in Paris. And he's often improvising, with the models, almost making kind of comic poses, striking almost, kind of flat Egyptian postures. There's a kind of irony and a sense of play. It's not that kind of haute couture, remote kind of 50s elegance. There's something kind of much more playful, much more of the spirit of pop going on in his fashion work. These were shot in Rome with a telephoto lens on the right here. The models are asked to walk backwards and forwards across the pedestrian crossing there. So the models are in on it, but the public is just passing. Here he's working with, well, remember all of those abstract experiments that he was getting up to. This is Kline shooting models in the dark, doing getting them to hold a pose, and then torchlight from behind in a long exposure, like around their profile, and then a burst of flash to light the model. That's how these are done. So this is no Photoshop. This is all done in one shot. So that's Kline mixing his early knowledge of abstraction with fashion. There's a model called that he liked working with called Dorothy McGowan, who came from a very kind of working class background. She died not long ago, unfortunately. They got on super well, and she's in lots of Kline's pictures. And then in 65, 66, Kline made a film called Who Are You, Polly Magoo, which is a satire of the fashion industry. Quite a biting, cutting one. And it tells the story of a young woman called Polly Magoo, who's from a very working class background, who gets turned into this year's face. And she gets, kind of manipulated and exploited. And that, in a way, that's what had happened to Dorothy McGowan, the model. And it's Dorothy McGowan who plays, having been a model with Kline, who plays Polly Magoo in the film. It's not so widely seen. I think it's probably the most intelligent and also the most cutting and the most tender film about the fashion industry, because Kline knew it from the inside. He knew what it was as a machine, and it was becoming more of a machine in the 50s, in the 60s, sorry. And he'd also had this experience of working with Dorothy McGowan, who had been plucked and turned into this kind of, new face. These are just some frames from the film, which are quite striking because they feel just like Kline's still photography in a way. These busy compositions. Remember those very early figurative paintings I was showing you? They still have this kind of feel to them. This is just me screen grabbing from the movie just to show you. Kind of playful sequence of facial manipulations that actually gets quite dark and sinister in the movie. So those are the three stories in a way. I had a list that had 9 such stories, but I knew I'd only have time for 3, and I barely scratched the surface of Kline's achievement. When we do the show, the International Centre of Photography, it will take up our whole space, and we have pretty big spaces, high walls, double height galleries, and still we're only going to be able to scratch the surface. But you will see all the different aspects of his work, the abstraction, the street photography, the books, the paintings, the fashion photographs, the films. It will all be there, and you'll get a good sense of it. I've also written a book to go along with it, which will be published by Thames and Hudson, which I think is the biggest book there's been on Kline, something like 400 pages. But even that doesn't get us into the full depth of his work. But I hope that's given you a flavor and a bit of a taste. And that's opening quite soon. So it's really on our minds at the moment to get this show ready for you all. Good. That's all I wanted to present to you. So if there are any questions or comments, let me open up the chat. Let's see if there are any. Is William Klein still making art? No, he slowed down. Well, is he? That's an interesting question. William still oversees everything. So there are exhibitions of his work happening all over the world, and curators have to run everything by him, and he's always got ideas about how to improve things. There are still books of his work being published, which he takes an awful lot of interest in terms of their design and their sequencing. In terms of new image making, no, he's getting a bit frail, although he's, you know, mentally pretty sharp. He's physically quite frail now. The most recent work we'll have in the exhibition is an amazing series of color images that he made in Brooklyn in 2013. And it was a real kind of, you know, homecoming for him there, shooting back on the streets of New York. So how old is William? So he's just had his 94th birthday. Can you imagine? Patricia says, great story. Didn't know about this. Good. Great presentation, David. I especially like seeing his trajectory from the earliest work I wasn't familiar with. Yeah, no, it's, you know what I said at the beginning about often when an artist's life is quite rich and complicated and layered, we tend to get a kind of slimmed down, simplified version of it. And I think it takes a while for people to accept that, you know, there are just some creative forces that in the world that are just very, very versatile, and it doesn't do them or the audience a kind of service to kind of simplify it. So I think we just have to accept that, you know, he did all of this. I mean, these stories I've shown you aren't separate, they all overlap in time. So for example, there might be a month in, I don't know, let's say the late 60s, where he's making a documentary film, he's planning a feature film, he's still painting, he's still shooting street photographs, he's still shooting for Vogue. It's quite breathless. When I was writing the book, I had to consult very often with his studio manager. Did he really do all of this in June of 1967 or 68? I mean, the energy of him is quite remarkable. Let's see, where can we obtain your book? It's being published by Thames and Hudson, so it'll be distributed all over the world. Where there's been a paper shortage worldwide, which has slowed things down, so that there's a chance that we won't get the book for the opening of the show. But the book is called William Klein, Yes, with a massive YES on the cover. So look out for it. That'll be everywhere. Bravo from NYC. Any other questions that I might have missed? From the Q&A. Are the films you highlighted and others still available for viewing online? Yeah, some are. So some are on the Criterion channel, some are on Metrograph, and we're just liaising with AFA in the Lower East Side for a number of screenings of the movies to happen alongside the exhibition. And within the exhibition, there will be a show reel of moments from a number of the different films, and we'll also have the film posters, film stills, storyboards. So we'll really unpack him as a movie maker. That'll take place on the top floor of ICP. Love Kline. For me, he's the ultimate street image fighter with life. Everything is alive. Did not know his paintings. Well, good. Yeah. Oh, can you talk about the Japanese photos? Yeah, I can talk about the Japanese photos. So he was invited to go to Tokyo by a combination of Fuji, photographic company, and another corporation, and also the Japanese government. And Kline likes to tell the story of how there are all kinds of social, formal protocols that happen in Japan, and certainly they did 50, 60 years ago. And but Kline just wanted to be out and on his own and looking around. So he would often kind of slip out the back of the hotel and that's go down the street. And that's how he found himself. He's a very charming, curious person that won't let a kind of language barrier or cultural barrier get in the way. He just has a way of getting himself into situations and getting people to kind of open up. And very few of his pictures are anything like what you would think of as kind of objective or kind of voyeuristic street photography. It's usually quite clear that the people in the picture can see that he's taking the picture and he's getting them to kind of, he's cajoling them maybe to kind of accommodate the camera or play up to the camera or perform a little bit. And you can see that in that photograph I showed you of the hairdressers school. And he shot with enormous energy. He was printing in the hotel at night. He knew it was going to be a book. He already had an enormous reputation among photographers in Japan. So he'd photographers, you know, as varied as Moriyama and Nakahira, they'd all seen his New York book, which had come out 7 or 8 years before. So he had a bit of a reputation in Japan. And made extraordinary work. Some of the most well-known pictures are of performers, a kind of dance troupe striking these kind of wild poses, kind of semi-naked in the street. In fact, he photographed them for an entire day from their rehearsal studio out into the street. Only a few of those have been seen, but we will have a slideshow of the images that he shot that day, around 600 pictures that he shot that day. I mean, the Tokyo book is probably my favorite for many reasons. Thanks for that question. What does Kline think of the current world of photography? Oh, that's interesting. He told me once that he was looking at people with their iPhones and he said, you know, there's probably people are doing more avant-garde things with their iPhones without realizing it than anyone was doing in, you know, the 20s, thinking they were a modernist or a surrealist. I think he has a genuinely popular, not populist, but I think he has a genuinely popular understanding of photography and photographic culture. He's slightly disdaining of kind of high art. And so this kind of mass distribution of photography, particularly in the form of smartphones, he's just very excited about it. He just feels that's a kind of natural place for photography to be somehow. So he's not remotely old-fashioned about it at all, which is nice for someone in their 90s. He's not kind of precious or protective of it either. He just feels it's very hybrid and very open and there should be no rules. You know, don't let anyone tell you what you can and can't do. You've got to try things, you've got to experiment, you've got to do it your own way. I think that openness, again, that's the kind of yes, that openness makes him a very, very appealing figure for younger generations of photographers who often feel quite trapped by, you know, what the world of documentary wants or what the world of art photography wants. Kline just says, you know, just go do it. Find your way through. His time in Moscow during the Soviet period, yeah. So he first goes to Moscow in, I think it's 59. And this is really the heart of the Cold War, you know, those paranoid tensions between East and West. And again, Kline finds himself being supervised. And you can see that his photographs in government buildings and institutions have a kind of stiffness. But when he gets into the street, he finds people are just people, you know, same problems, same vanities, same complicated family relations. So he can't make these kinds of pictures under kind of formal supervision. So he has to be kind of out there on his own. Made a few trips to Moscow, and then eventually made a book, which is terrific. I think it's very exciting to see. This is John Goodman. Very exciting to see and feel your excitement. Yeah, I am excited. I am excited. You're clearly are the right person to keep William Klein alive. Terrific and exciting presentation. Well, thank you very much. Well, there's no point doing anything as a curator if you're not excited about it. God, wouldn't it be dull just putting on an exhibition because you think you should do? I am excited about it, partly because of the range of the work, partly because of those different kinds of stories that I was just telling you there. I don't think many people will be aware of his kind of continued interest in Black life and Black experience, for one thing. I don't think many people will know that someone who did that abstract work was also a street photographer and also a fashion photographer, and that actually all of those things do connect up. It's just that they usually get parceled up and boxed up. So yeah, that's exciting. Emily, are his New York, Moscow, and Tokyo books available anywhere? The interesting thing about the books, Emily, is that because Kline is so restless, he often kind of remakes them. So he tends not to issue facsimiles, so not exactly the same as they were when they first appeared. So the New York book from 1956 has never really been reprinted in that form, and it is quite hard to get hold of. He has done subsequent New York books, returning to those pictures, changing the design, the layout, the choices, that kind of thing. Now, when you come and see the show, which you all will do at ICP, we've made video films of the books, and they'll play on kind of large flat screens, almost like kind of reading desks. And every page is turned. So even if you've not seen these absolutely, legendary mythical books, you will get to see every page of the New York book, the Rome book, the Tokyo book, the Moscow book. I don't like, as a curator, just putting a book under glass in a vitrine with a little label that says this is a very important book. And the viewers can't, the audience for the show can't see it. So we've made these films, so you will be able to see every page. What's the realist date of your book, please? Not yet on the market, correct? Yeah, it should be. Somebody told me they saw it advertised on Amazon already. It's got its ISBN number and all of that. We're hoping some point in the run of the show. We've been told it probably won't be ready for the start of the show, which is June 3rd. Beyond that, I cannot say. Sorry to be so tantalizing about the book, but I'm glad you're interested. Are there any other questions that I'm missing out? His paintings have the same quality, every direction, explosions. Yes, it's true. It's true. That's very true. Let's see if there are any other. How long is the show up? So it opens on June the 3rd and runs through to September 12th. So pretty much the whole of the summer, and then a little bit into the fall. So you've got some time.
We have time for one more question if there are any from our audience. David, I have to say, oh, here's one. Do we need to
buy our tickets in advance? That would be sensible. We are expecting large numbers of people. That would be sensible, yeah. So book your time. The space is quite big. So even with, I don't actually know if we've now got COVID restriction numbers, but regardless, it would be best to get your time ticket in advance. If I live in Canada, how can I do it? How can you do what? Patricia, get a ticket. Oh, what's my favorite image? Oh, that's a tough one. There's a lot up there. I do love the Tokyo Hairdressers, which is why I put it in. And why do I like that? If you look at every square inch of that image, there's something interesting going on. It's a real miracle of observation and composition and timing. When I look at that picture, I just think, how quick is his eye? Is he really looking at everything in the frame the way you know, the resulting photograph shows you everything in the frame. I just don't know. When I look at that picture, I just think that is amazing. It's also a picture that works at any size. You know, it's quite compelling showing it on a screen here. There'll be a very large print of it, maybe 4 feet, 5 feet wide in the show, and it still holds the interest. Let me see if there's any other. Will the books be on sale, ICP, especially the New York one? Yeah, there'll be a version of the New York book for sale, for sure. I'm just scrolling up and down the questions, making sure I'm not missing any out. If you've had the time to type the question in, I feel I should answer it. I'm just making sure I haven't missed anything.
David, it looks like there was a question about buying tickets to the show from Canada. So is that an online process?
Yeah, that's an online process. Yeah. Yeah. So you just go to the ICP's website. Yeah. We've got international in our name.
Right. And there's a last one there from Elizabeth. Will Kline come to New York for the exhibition?
We are hoping to. He's dead set on it. It might, in the last instance, be his doctor's call. So I see him often, and some days he's like super energetic, and sometimes he's a little bit frail. Spends most of his time in a chair now, but he's so excited. It feels like a real homecoming to him. And his grandfather was the first of the family to come to the US, and actually had a store on Delancey Street, just around the corner from where ICP is now, on the corner of Essex and Delancey. So it really is a kind of homecoming. So he's desperate to come. So we're crossing our fingers that he's in good enough shape to come. But you know, he's 94, so it's not super easy. Fingers crossed.
David, your presentation was amazing. The
Oh.
imagery was astounding. I mean, you had me at bated breath. So on behalf of the members of APAD, I wanted to thank you for this outstanding presentation. And I want to thank everyone who attended. Can you give the exhibition dates one more time?
June 3rd to September 12th.
Great. I hope everyone gets their tickets and gets to see it. I know when we're there for APAD, we'll pull away and try to get to see it as well. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and thank you again for attending.
Thanks, everyone. See you at the ICP.